It's not just the one dimension of carbon. And that's unfortunately where we've got to. We've got to this story that, it's carbon and energy, and that's our environmental issues. And the reality is actually, so saying, it's about water, it's about pollution, it's about topsoil erosion, it's about loss of rainforest, loss of biodiversity, it's about, human impacts, it's about, cultural impacts. So it's much more dimensional. And one of the biggest drivers, even more than transport, is food. We have these compartments, and we like to put everything into a compartment. But you can't have a sustainable world unless you have a healthy world. You can't have a healthy world unless you have a secure world. You can't have a secure world unless you have an educated world. You can't have, so forth and so forth. And it goes back and forth. So there's a core of, for me, it's kind of what I call Planet 0.20 thinking and living. And that's a way in which we're starting to see people move, which is sort of saying, I want more transparency behind the brands that I purchase. I want to understand a little bit more about my impact as an individual. I want to understand, what the long-term impacts of using these products are on my health, on my family, on my wallet. So it's a totally integrated approach. So it's very hard to resonate a message that sometimes doesn't have a very positive outcome. So you have to try and find a way in which to deliver the message that can compete with the noise of other brands. So you have to try and figure out a way to make it more exciting. And if we, for example, had just said to people, we want to start a recycling campaign, everyone would be like, haven't we seen this before? This is what we already know. Tell me something new. So we had to do something that was going to stimulate people's imagination, that was going to allow them to be curious, allow them to get involved. And if we had just said, hey, you need to know about plastic in the ocean, people would have probably switched off. We would have, created a massive disconnect. But if we turn around and say, we're building a boat made entirely of plastic bottles to sail across the Pacific, then all of a sudden you've dragged somebody into an exciting story. It rises above the noise of all the other brands and all the other conversations that are going on in your daily life, and it allows you to buy into a deeper message. I worked on a Levi's campaign for them. It was called Waterless. The idea was, how do we remove water from the actual supply chain? How do we make it engaging for the consumer? How do we try and drive quantifiable outcomes? And what that did was allow Levi's to donate 200 million litres of fresh, clean drinking water to communities around the world. Now, that may take an individual many years to raise the funds to go and do that, whereas Levi's, within the course of a season, one of their fashion seasons, can go out and basically apply fresh, clean drinking water to thousands of people for many, many years. So I think the smallest changes can have the biggest impact when it comes to a brand, just because of the sheer volume of materials that they often use. And I think that's really important. I think the first thing to recognize is that there is no such thing as a green company, right? I think that's really important. I think when you look at it in the most basic terms, we built a Planet 0.10 system, and that's the system that we all currently sit within. And that system was built on cheap fuel, infinite resources, and an endless horizon. We now know that we have finite fuel, we don't have an endless horizon, and our resources aren't cheap. So we have to fundamentally shift the system and move the system. So right now, we're moving around the furniture on the Titanic. We're like, oh, let's redesign and push it over here and push it over here, but we're still within the same frame set. So what we have to do is actually make a massive leap, a systemic change, and that's going to require not only businesses, but it's also going to require governments and leadership from politicians, which unfortunately seems to be lacking nowadays, and it's also going to require us, citizens, to actually take the lead. Because at the end of the day, the politicians and the businesses are a reflection of what they think we want. Or we've made those decisions to put those brands in positions of power, or those politicians in positions of power. So it has to come back to the individual as a first starting point. We all live on Spaceship Earth. And if we all want to keep on flying on this spaceship, we have to learn to do it in a sustainable manner. And it doesn't matter, which country is taking, action or not action. If we're not all in it together, then it's a real problem, because, China's on the same spaceship. So we can sort of say it's over there, but the impact of that, the pollution and stuff is definitely going to affect us and is already affecting us. So what we have to do is act today, not as if it will maybe happen, could happen, is a myth. It's happening.